Okay, folks, it is time to put the bottom end back together on this 951. So what we've got here is washed these cases and cleaned them up spick and span. They are squeaky, squeaky clean. All the bolts are cleaned up here. These are not stainless steel, by the way. I found out that you can't use stainless steel there. The reason they're not stainless steel is because it's not as strong. Those are the studs that the head bolts mount to, and they need to be super, super strong, and that's not strong enough with stainless steel, so that's why they're like that. But we cleaned them up anyway. Also, with your crankcase stainless steel bolts, you can clean them up or buy new ones. Buy new ones is recommended. I did not do that. I just cleaned mine up with a wire wheel. You need to use a stainless steel wire wheel, though. The reason is if you use a carbon or non-stainless steel wire wheel, it'll leave iron deposits on the bolts, and those will rust. It's not like it's going to rust the bolt all the way through. It's just surface rust. But if you're going to do it, just go ahead and invest in a stainless steel wire wheel. Be done with it. Got our torque wrench here. A little bit of two-stroke oil. Don't need much of that. That's mainly for the crankshaft over here, which we use a little dripper in here. I turned it up on its side. It's pretty all full oiled up with two-stroke oil. So this thing is lubed down in good shape. You might be wondering why the PTO is on it and the flywheel is on it. Well, I never took them off. And the reason I didn't take them off is because this crankshaft is perfectly fine. I washed it with diesel fuel 2 times, and I inspected all of the bearings here. You know, when you rotate them, you can feel them, you can hear them, you can tell if there's any kind of something in there, you're going to feel it or you're going to hear it. These were completely silent, totally solid, with no oil, washing with diesel fuel. So this crankshaft is pretty solid. It does not need to be replaced. So there was no need to take the PTO off and the flywheel off. Could have done that, but all I would have done is just put it right back on. So why go through that trouble? So anyway, this is all in good shape. What I did do, though, is stood it up on its end using this dropper here and two-stroke oil. I filled up the bearings with two-stroke oil. So this thing is super, super lubricated. It's all ready to go. For the counterbalance shaft, it's got 2 bearings here. Reach in there, pull this seal back, take something like this or even this. I use this, my little pick I made, and pop that plastic cap back and repack it with synthetic grease. And then put the plastic cap, press it back in, like this one. This one's already done. Do that before you put this back in. Now that we're ready to get started, one of the first things I'm going to do here is I'm going to take these studs and I'm going to put them in the top half. And the reason we do this so that you can basically stand it up, because when we put this crankshaft in, those piston connecting rods there, they're going to protrude down. So this kind of gives us a little cradle. They actually make a little cradle you can put them in. But these rods are not stainless steel, by the way. Stainless steel is not strong enough, so that's why these are kind of rusted looking. I did clean them up. A lot of guys don't even put Loctite on these, but right now I'm just going to hand tighten these. I'm also going to put the nuts on these because it's not good to let it sit directly on these. You'll mess up the threads, and then that's going to cause trouble putting the nuts on later. So we'll finish putting all these in, and then we're going to flip it upside down. Because we took the time to chase these threads out and clean them up, this is where you get dividends from that kind of stuff. It makes things like this super, super easy and clean and fast. Like that. I'll turn it this way. Well, actually, I need it this way because the counterbalance shaft is on this side where I can work with it. So now we're going to set the crank down in these journals. Got to pick it up. Main thing you're watching here is those seals. You kind of have to watch 10 things at once. Let everything rest down in there. So that looks pretty good. And then we got to move all of our bearings, the pins, down over into their proper locations here. Like that, like that. And get this one up like that and like that. And then I'm just looking here to make sure seal, bearing ring, 2 pins, seal, bearing ring, all that looks good. Make sure everything there is perfect. So that all looks good. Now what we need to do is put in the counterbalance shaft. But to do that, I'm going to need a flashlight for this so I can show you. There is a marker. It's a little blue painted line right there. I don't know if you can see that, but it's a little blue line right there. So in between those two teeth, we have to take the counterbalance shaft, which has, can you see that? Little blue line right here by the, try to point to that one. So that blue line's got to match up with that one. If you don't do that, it's bad trouble. It's going to be a vibration and worse. So now to put this, I put just a little dollop of grease right here on the little blue mark there and right here where it's easier for me to see. It's just so hard with the shade and everything to see those blue lines, but what I'm going to do is got to make sure this thing here is where it needs to be. And I'm just going to line up. I know that that's got to mesh in right there with that. I'm just going to roll it into place. And I see that it's got to go into that slot. This thing needs to come over. I got to talk about this for just a second. This little collar here has got a hole in it right there. And that hole needs to be facing basically towards the cylinders and the carburetors. So I'm going to rotate that around like that so that that's positioned correctly. Not exactly sure why that is. I think it might have something to do with letting air escape out of the top of that thing. But in any case, that's how it's supposed to go. So just double check all the bearings and things here for this. I'm kind of making sure that these bearing are actually seals, or not bearings, for this counterbalance shaft are kind of in the middle of the slot there, so that when we put the top back on, it's going to go on smooth. So that's in there pretty good. Looks pretty good, feels pretty good. I'm just going to double check our marks. There they are, right there. Maybe I can show you. I'm going to give you a good look at what's going on here. You see the two blue lines there. There you go. So when I rotate this, that's what you want to see. You want to see those two lines perfectly match up. Gonna do the same thing on the top, which is actually the bottom, but just gonna clean all this off. This did not touch any grease or anything like that. I just want to hit it one more time, make sure that's all clean. Now we are gonna put 518 on this, and it just takes a very, very thin coat here. Not much at all. We're going to go back over it with our fingers. Some people use a roller. They roll this on. And they also use a couple of different things other than 518. All that's good and fine. But I am going to use what the manual calls for, which is a very, very thin coat of this. Okay, so now I'm gonna take this. We were this back over here. We're gonna very carefully set this on top. This should go straight down all the way around and check. Take a little rubber mallet, just kind of tap it down. Make sure our crank still turns freely, and it does. Now we're going to put our bolts in. What we're going to do is, manual calls for Loctite on the threads, but grease up underneath the bolts. A little bit of grease. And might be wondering why I'm not using Loctite on these threads, and it's because, well, I am using Loctite, but I'm using 518, and that is because this 518 is more than just Loctite. It's actually a sealant too. Because two strokes are very, very sensitive to any kind of leaking down in the crankcase, because the air and fuel mixture actually happens below the pistons too. And because of that, if you have any kind of leaks, these bolt holes go through the cases. So if you have any kind of leaks in these threads, it's going to show up as a air fuel mixture issue. That's going to be a real bear to figure out what's going on. Okay, so now we got all the bolts in. Next thing to do is we need to start torquing these down. And I have our torque specs here. So the first sequence is going to be 12 Nm. So we're going to set our torque wrench to 12 Newton meters. So that's 13.6. So we're going to back off to right there. I'm going to do the big bolts first. And number one, according to this, actually, let's do it this way. Moved it over here so I could see it. So number one is here. There. All right, so round two is 23. everywhere. So we're going to bring this up to, that's 20. That's 20. 23. Same sequence. All right, and then our final sequence is going to be 40, and that's just the big bolts in the middle. Set our torque wrench to 40. Right there. And then the same process. Okay, we've got all that torqued down. Everything's smooth. I also checked the Bendix in here to make sure it's engaging with the flywheel. You can stick your finger in there and sort of twist it backwards and then rotate the flywheel and make sure those teeth engage. All that's fine. So the last thing we need to do for the bottom end is flip it over and put some oil in the counterbalance reservoir. So what you're supposed to put in this is 30 weight oil, and it needs to be straight up 30 weight like what I've got here, and not like 5 weight 30 or 0 weight 30 or 10 weight 30. And the reason is those dual weights like that for modern cars are designed so that they flow as a lighter weight when cold, like a 5 weight, and then when the engine gets up above 200 degrees, then they flow like a heavier weight. Well, this cavity at the bottom isn't going to see those temperatures. So if you put a 5 weight 30 in here, it's going to stay around a 5 weight, and it's never going to get up to a 30 weight. So that's why you want to put straight 30. And this calls for an ounce or 30 millimeters. This is a 10 millimeter syringe, so I got to do 3 of these. Aren't I good with the math? All right, so that concludes the bottom end rebuild. So the obvious next thing to do is the top end. We've got our pistons coming in. We'll get our cylinders bored at the machine shop. So stay tuned for the next episode on that. And as always, thanks for watching.